A quiet girl, an arrogant teacher, and a piano. What began as a cruel attempt to humiliate her turned into a moment that silenced the entire classroom and shattered the proud egos. You won't believe how she turned the tables. Not with words, but with music. The rain tapped gently against the windows of Willow Ridge Academy as luxury cars pulled into the circular driveway. Students in designer uniforms stepped out, their laughter echoing across marble-paved courtyards that seemed built for those born into privilege. In the distance, Alyssa Carter quietly descended from the public bus, her worn sneakers touching the sidewalk with barely a sound. She clutched her second-hand backpack tighter, eyes downcast as she navigated through clusters of chattering students who didn't even notice her presence. At Willow Ridge, Alyssa was invisible, a scholarship student in a sea of wealth. She didn't have the right clothes, the right accessories, or the right last name. And Madison Harrington, with her perfect blonde hair and calculating blue eyes, never let her forget it. "Look, it's the charity case." Madison's voice cut through the morning air as Alyssa passed the main courtyard. "I wonder if she ate this morning, or if she's waiting for the church handouts again." Madison's friends erupted in laughter, their voices sharp as knives. Alyssa bit her lip, but kept walking, her steps quickening. She learned that at Willow Ridge, being invisible was sometimes better than being noticed. But there was one thing about Alyssa that nobody at Willow Ridge knew, something that couldn't be bought with Madison's family fortune or connections. Every evening, when the prestigious academy emptied and the wealthy students returned to their mansions, Alyssa would slip into St. Mary's Church 3 blocks from her apartment. There, in the fading light filtering through stained glass windows, she would sit at the old wooden piano, close her eyes, and transform. Her fingers, hesitant in the hallways of Willow Ridge, became confident and fluid across the ivory keys. She played Chopin, Debussy, and Bach, composers she'd studied from borrowed library books and free online videos. Without formal training, without an expensive instrument at home, Alyssa had taught herself to speak the language of music. In those quiet moments at the church piano, she wasn't the scholarship girl or the outsider. She was simply Alyssa, a girl whose soul could translate emotion into melody. But it was a talent she kept hidden, a private sanctuary from the world that judged her by her worn shoes and discount uniform. That morning, as she slipped past Madison's taunts and into the echoing hallways of Willow Ridge, Alyssa had no idea that her two worlds were about to collide, that the talent she'd nurtured in solitude was about to become her most powerful voice. After each grueling day at Willow Ridge, Alyssa didn't return to a mansion with a private music room or head to expensive lessons with renowned instructors. Instead, she made her way to the small 2-bedroom apartment she shared with her mother, Monica Carter. Their home wasn't spacious or luxurious, but it held something the grand houses of her classmates often lacked: genuine warmth. Photos lined the walls, not of exotic vacations or country club events, but of simple moments. Alyssa's elementary school graduation, Monica in her nurse's uniform, the two of them laughing at the public park. On this particular evening, Alyssa found her mother at the kitchen table, still in her hospital scrubs, dark circles beneath her eyes betraying the double shift she'd just completed. "How was school today, sweetheart?" Monica asked, summoning a smile despite her exhaustion. "Same as always," Alyssa replied, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Monica studied her daughter's face, seeing beyond the casual dismissal. "The music room was open today?" she asked softly. Alyssa shook her head. "No, Mr. Grayson only lets the advanced students use it during lunch. Students like Madison, whose parents donated generously to the school's arts program." Monica reached across the table, her hand, cracked from hospital disinfectant and hard work, covering her daughter's. "You know, I still have that article about the community college summer program they offer." "Mom, we've talked about this," Alyssa interrupted gently. "Those programs still cost money we don't have." Monica's eyes shimmered with something between determination and regret. "I could pick up another shift on Saturdays. Mrs. Patel next door said she'd be willing to." "You're already working 60 hours a week," Alyssa said firmly. "I'm fine, really." But she wasn't fine. Music wasn't just something Alyssa enjoyed. It was oxygen, necessary and life-sustaining. Since she was 7 years old, when she first discovered the old upright piano tucked away in the corner of St. Mary's Church, music had been her sanctuary. She remembered that first encounter vividly. Her mother had been volunteering at the church's food pantry, and Alyssa had wandered into the empty chapel, drawn by some inexplicable force to the neglected instrument. The first notes she'd pressed were discordant, the piano badly out of tune. But even those imperfect sounds had awakened something within her, a recognition, a calling. Father Thomas had found her there an hour later, her small fingers experimenting with melodies she'd created in her mind. "You have a gift, child," he'd said, his voice gentle with wonder. "Would you like to learn more?" There were no funds for proper lessons, but Father Thomas had given her something equally valuable: permission to play whenever the church was empty, and a stack of yellowed music books left behind by the church's former organist. For 8 years since that day, Alyssa had taught herself. She'd memorized scales from borrowed theory books, studied technique from YouTube videos on the library computers, and practiced finger positions on a paper keyboard she'd drawn when the church wasn't available. Where her mother had saved enough to buy a smartphone last year, Alyssa had filled it with recordings of master pianists. Listening during her bus commute, her fingers silently mimicking their movements against her school notebook. What she lacked in formal training, she made up for with raw passion and determination. Hours that Madison spent at exclusive social clubs, Alyssa spent at that church piano, playing until her fingers ached and her soul felt lighter. "I saw your music history test," Monica said, interrupting Alyssa's thoughts. "An A+. Your teacher wrote that your analysis of Beethoven's later works showed exceptional insight." Alyssa smiled faintly. "Mr. Grayson didn't actually believe I wrote it. He asked if I'd gotten help." Monica's expression hardened slightly. That man wouldn't recognize real talent if it performed at Carnegie Hall. She squeezed her daughter's hand. "Don't let anyone dim your light, Alyssa. Not everyone will see your worth, but that doesn't make it any less real." Those words would echo in Alyssa's mind the next day, when everything changed, when a gift she'd nurtured in private would be forced into the unforgiving spotlight of Willow Ridge Academy. The following day, Alyssa slipped into the music classroom and took her usual seat in the back corner. She positioned herself carefully, close enough to hear the lesson, far enough to avoid Madison's orbit of influence. The classroom itself was a testament to Willow Ridge's wealth. Gleaming instruments lined the walls, and at its center stood a magnificent Steinway grand piano that cost more than Monica would earn in 5 years. Mr. Richard Grayson entered precisely as the bell rang. At 56, he moved with the deliberate grace of someone who believed the world should adjust to his rhythm, not the other way around. His reputation among Willow Ridge parents was impeccable. He'd guided the children of senators and CEOs to prestigious conservatories, his recommendation alone often securing their admission. "Today," he announced, his voice carrying the slight British inflection he'd cultivated during a summer program at Oxford decades ago, "we will explore musical improvisation, the ability to express authentic emotion through spontaneous composition." He surveyed the room, his gaze lingering appreciatively on certain students, those whose parents funded the annual spring concert, those who arrived at lessons in chauffeured cars. "This exercise will separate those with genuine musicality from those who merely practice by rote," he continued. "Madison, perhaps you'd like to demonstrate?" Madison Harrington straightened in her chair, her confidence as polished as her manicured nails. "Of course, Mr. Grayson." She approached the Steinway with practiced poise, adjusting the bench with the familiarity of someone who'd been playing on premium instruments since childhood. Her performance was technically flawless, scales and arpeggios executed with precision, dynamics perfectly controlled. When she finished, Mr. Grayson nodded approvingly. "Excellent technique, Madison. Your years of private instruction are evident." Several other students performed, each receiving Grayson's measured critique. Some played well, others adequately, but all belonged to the unspoken inner circle of Willow Ridge's music program. Alyssa kept her eyes down, focusing on her notebook. She'd learned that invisibility was sometimes a shield, but today that shield would be stripped away. Alyssa Carter, Mr. Grayson's voice sliced through her thoughts. Perhaps you'd like to give it a try? Or are you just here to observe, as usual? The room fell silent. Alyssa looked up to find every eye upon her, expressions ranging from curiosity to the barely concealed anticipation of witnessing a disaster. Madison exchanged glances with her friends, a smirk playing at the corner of her lips. Mr. Grayson hadn't called on Alyssa out of educational concern. In his 20 years at Willow Ridge, he developed clear categories for his students, those worth his investment and those merely occupying seats. Scholarship students like Alyssa fell firmly into the latter. His invitation wasn't an opportunity. It was a public demonstration of what he believed to be her inevitable inadequacy. Alyssa began, her voice barely audible. We're waiting, Ms. Carter, Mr. Grayson said, checking his watch. Unless you'd prefer to admit you're not prepared. Something in his tone, the certainty of her failure, the dismissal before she'd even begun, stirred something deep within Alyssa. She thought of her mother's hands, cracked from overwork but still gentle when they brushed her hair. She thought of Father Thomas telling her, music isn't owned by those who can afford it, child. It belongs to those who need it. She thought of the countless evenings at the church piano, playing in solitude, her only audience the fading sunlight through stained glass. Well, Mr. Grayson prompted, his impatience evident. Madison leaned toward her friend, whispering just loud enough for Alyssa to hear. This should be entertaining. She probably thinks Chopin is a type of salad. Laughter rippled through the room, soft but cutting. Alyssa stood slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could refuse. She could sit down. She could preserve the sanctuary of her private musical world and never let these people glimpse what lived inside her. Or she could play. As she approached the Steinway, the whispers intensified. Someone snickered. Someone else made a comment about charity performances. Mr. Grayson stepped back, arms folded across his chest, his expression a mixture of impatience and preemptive disappointment. The piano bench felt foreign beneath her, smoother, more luxurious than the worn wooden bench at St. Mary's. The keys gleamed with a perfection she'd never encountered. For a moment, doubt paralyzed her. This wasn't her piano. This wasn't her world. We don't have all day, Ms. Carter, Mr. Grayson said. Alyssa placed her fingers on the keys, and the first tentative note rang out, clear, resonant, and startlingly beautiful in the suddenly hushed room. But before she could continue, a muffled laugh broke her concentration. Did she just play one note and stop? Someone whispered, followed by more laughter. Madison tossed her hair back, her posture radiating superiority. Maybe that's her entire repertoire. Alyssa felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the sensation of shrinking beneath their judgment. Her fingers trembled slightly above the keys. In that moment, she stood at a crossroads, retreat into invisibility or step fully into her truth. She closed her eyes, shutting out Madison, Mr. Grayson, the gleaming classroom with its atmosphere of privilege. Instead, she summoned the feeling of the church at dusk, the way the light filtered through colored glass, the peaceful solitude where her music had flourished. She took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune floated into the air, delicate, crystalline, and executed with a sensitivity that immediately silenced the whispers. Alyssa's touch was light yet confident, each note ringing with perfect clarity as her fingers moved across the keys with natural grace that belied her lack of formal training. The opening phrases were gentle, almost tentative, like moonlight first appearing through clouds. But as she continued, something remarkable happened. Alyssa seemed to forget where she was. Her shoulders relaxed, her posture changed, and her expression transformed from anxiety to something approaching transcendence. This wasn't just playing, this was communion. In the third measure, when the melody began its ascent, a collective intake of breath was audible in the classroom. The Steinway, an instrument accustomed to technically correct but emotionally restrained performances from Willow Ridge students, now sang with a voice few had heard before. Under Alyssa's hands, wasn't merely an expensive instrument. It was a vessel for something profound. Madison's smirk faded. She straightened in her chair, her carefully maintained expression of superiority crumbling into undisguised shock. She glanced at her friends, seeking confirmation of what she was hearing, but they too were transfixed, their earlier mockery forgotten. Mr. Grayson's transformation was even more striking. The dismissive set of his mouth gradually slackened, his crossed arms slowly dropped to his sides, and his eyes, accustomed to finding flaws, widened in reluctant recognition. 30 years of teaching had given him an ear that could detect the difference between technical proficiency and genuine artistry. What he was hearing transcended the former and embodied the latter in a way that challenged everything he thought he knew about this unremarkable scholarship student. As Alyssa reached the piece's middle section, where the harmonies deepen and the emotional landscape expands, her interpretation took on a quality that couldn't be taught, a perfect balance of technical control and emotional surrender. The crescendos swelled with yearning. The diminuendos whispered secrets. Her phrasing breathed as naturally as speech, each musical line shaped with intuitive understanding of the composer's intent. A boy in the front row, the son of a renowned conductor, leaned forward unconsciously, drawn by the authenticity of what he was hearing. Two girls who had giggled at Alyssa's approach to the piano now sat motionless, one with tears forming in her eyes at the unexpected beauty. When Alyssa reached the climactic passage, her dynamics perfectly calibrated to the room's acoustics, the transformation of the classroom was complete. Gone was the atmosphere of judgment and hierarchy. In its place was something rarely experienced at Willow Ridge, the pure, democratic power of art to transcend social boundaries and speak directly to the human spirit. Madison stared at her own hands that had played the same piece just last month at her recital, hands that had been trained by the finest teachers money could buy. She had played every note correctly, her technique impeccable. Yet she had never made the music sound like this, like a private confession, like moonlight itself had been captured in sound. As the final notes resolved, tapering into a silence more eloquent than sound, Alyssa slowly opened her eyes. For several heartbeats, no one moved. No one spoke. The spell her playing had cast remained unbroken, suspending the normal rules and hierarchies of Willow Ridge Academy. Then, from the back of the room, someone began to applaud. Hesitantly at first, then with growing conviction. Others joined, the applause spreading like ripples on water until nearly every student was clapping, some even rising to their feet. Only two people remained motionless. Madison, whose face had paled to the color of paper, her carefully constructed superiority visibly crumbling, and Mr. Grayson, whose expression had transformed into something complex. A mixture of disbelief, reassessment, and the particular discomfort of a man confronting the limitations of his own perception. When the applause finally subsided, Mr. Grayson cleared his throat, struggling to regain his authoritative demeanor. "Well," he said, his voice lacking its usual certainty, "that was unexpected. It was hardly the praise another student might have received for such a performance. But coming from Grayson, even this reluctant acknowledgement represented a seismic shift." Alyssa remained at the piano, her posture straight but not rigid, her face flushed not with embarrassment but with the lingering intensity of musical expression. Something had changed within her, a door unlocked, a truth acknowledged. She had stepped into the light and found herself not diminished, but magnified. Mr. Grayson, attempting to regain control of his classroom, gestured for Alyssa to return to her seat. "That will be sufficient, Miss Carter." But before Alyssa could rise from the bench, she looked directly at him, not with defiance, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had just discovered her own power, and said in a clear voice that carried to every corner of the room, "Everyone has talent, Mr. Grayson. What matters is whether you have the eyes to see it." The classroom fell silent once more, the students' gazes darting between Alyssa and their teacher, witnessing a shift in the power dynamic that had seemed immutable just minutes before. Alyssa's words hung in the air, simple yet profound, challenging not just Mr. Grayson, but the very foundation upon which Willow Ridge's hierarchy was built. The silence that followed was electric, charged with the collective realization that something fundamental had shifted in the room's balance of power. Mr. Grayson's face flushed slightly, the color rising from his collar to his cheeks. In his 23 years at Willow Ridge, no student had ever spoken to him with such quiet authority, especially not a scholarship student from the wrong side of town. His lips parted as if to deliver a reprimand, but the words wouldn't come. The truth in Alyssa's statement had disarmed him more effectively than any argument could have. "Return to your seat, Ms. Carter," he finally managed, his voice lacking its usual commanding resonance. As Alyssa rose from the piano bench, something unexpected happened. A boy named Thomas, the quiet son of a state senator who had never before spoken up in class, began to applaud again. The sound was jarring in the tense atmosphere, but soon others joined in, the applause building into something that felt like both appreciation and rebellion. Madison watched this unfold with mounting horror. She had spent years carefully cultivating her position at the top of Willow Ridge's social and academic hierarchy. Her parents had invested thousands in private lessons, exclusive summer programs, and even a custom-built music room in their home. Yet in less than 5 minutes, Alyssa Carter, the girl whose mother wore hospital scrubs instead of designer suits to parent-teacher conferences, had commanded the room's attention and respect in a way Madison never had. "That's enough," Mr. Grayson said sharply, but his authority had been compromised. The applause continued for several more seconds before reluctantly fading. As Alyssa walked back to her seat, she caught Madison's eye. There was no triumph in Alyssa's gaze, no gloating or satisfaction at having upended the social order. There was only a quiet dignity that made Madison's carefully constructed superiority seem suddenly hollow. Just as Alyssa reached her desk, the classroom door opened. Eleanor Collins, head of Willow Ridge's arts department, stood in the doorway. Unlike Grayson, whose teaching philosophy favored pedigree over potential, Mrs. Collins had built her distinguished career on identifying genuine talent regardless of its source. At 62, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and posture that spoke of decades of classical training, she commanded respect without demanding it. "Richard," she addressed Mr. Grayson, "I was on my way to the administrative meeting when I heard the most extraordinary playing coming from your classroom." Her eyes scanned the room, settling on Alyssa with unmistakable interest. "I stood outside for the entire piece. Debussy has always separated technicians from artists, hasn't he?" Mr. Grayson shifted uncomfortably. "We were just conducting an improvisation exercise." Indeed, Mrs. Collins stepped fully into the room, her gaze never leaving Alyssa. "And who was playing?" That interpretation of Clair de Lune had a quality I haven't heard in this building for quite some time. Before Mr. Grayson could answer, she walked directly to Alyssa's desk. "It was you, wasn't it?" It wasn't really a question. Alyssa nodded, suddenly shy again under this new attention. "How long have you been studying?" Mrs. Collins asked. "I haven't." "Not formally," Alyssa admitted. "I taught myself. I practiced at St. Mary's Church when they let me use their piano." Mrs. Collins's eyebrows rose slightly, not in disbelief but in deepened interest. She glanced at Mr. Grayson, whose discomfort was now plainly visible, then back to Alyssa. "You've never had lessons?" she asked. "No, ma'am." "And the Debussy? Where did you learn it?" "I listened to recordings. I found the sheet music at the library," Alyssa explained. "Sometimes I watch tutorial videos when I can access the internet." The room had gone completely silent again. Even Madison was leaning forward slightly, unwillingly captivated by this exchange. Mrs. Collins studied Alyssa for a long moment, her experienced eyes seeing beyond the worn uniform and quiet demeanor to something essential. Then she asked the question that would change everything. "Have you ever considered applying for the Willow Ridge Music Scholarship Program?" A collective gasp rippled through the classroom. The Music Scholarship Program was the crown jewel of Willow Ridge's arts education, a fully funded path that included private instruction with master teachers, performance opportunities, and virtually guaranteed admission to top conservatories. Only 2 students were selected each year, and the competition was fierce even among the wealthy students whose parents had invested in their musical education since toddlerhood. Madison's face drained of color. She had been preparing her application for months, her parents hiring a consultant to perfect her portfolio. The idea that Alyssa might be considered for the same opportunity was unthinkable. Mrs. Collins, Mr. Grayson interjected, "The application deadline is—" "As department head, I have some discretion in these matters," Mrs. Collins interrupted smoothly. She turned back to Alyssa. "What you demonstrated today goes beyond technique. It shows an innate musicality that can't be taught, only developed." She reached into her portfolio and extracted a business card. "Come see me after school tomorrow. We should discuss your options." The bell rang, signaling the end of class. As students gathered their belongings, the atmosphere was charged with the awareness that they had witnessed something significant, not just a beautiful performance, but the disruption of an order they had all taken for granted. Madison pushed past Alyssa on her way out, deliberately knocking against her shoulder. "This isn't over," she hissed, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. Alyssa stood still, Mrs. Collins's card in her hand, feeling simultaneously weightless and as heavy as all her dreams combined. For the first time since arriving at Willow Ridge, she felt visible, not as an object of derision, but as herself. As the classroom emptied, Mr. Grayson remained at his desk, shuffling papers with unusual agitation. When only he and Alyssa remained, he looked up, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Carter," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "talent without discipline is meaningless. Remember that." It was as close to an acknowledgement as she would get from him. Not an apology, not praise, but a reluctant recognition that he had misjudged her. Alyssa nodded once, then walked out of the classroom with her head held high, Mrs. Collins's card tucked safely in her pocket, a small rectangle of possibility that hadn't existed an hour before. Alyssa practically ran the 3 blocks from the bus stop to her apartment building, her heart pounding with an urgency that had nothing to do with physical exertion. The faded brick structure looked different somehow, as if the events of the day had altered her perception of everything familiar. She took the stairs 2 at a time, fumbling with her key at the door. Monica was home early, still in her scrubs, sorting through bills at the kitchen table. One look at her daughter's face, and she was on her feet. "Alyssa, what happened? Are you okay?" Words tumbled out in a rush as Alyssa tried to capture the day's events. Mr. Grayson's challenge, her moment of decision, the performance that had silenced the room, and finally, impossibly, Mrs. Collins's offer. She pulled out the business card as evidence, as if afraid the entire experience might evaporate without proof. Monica listened, her expression shifting from concern to astonishment to something deeper, a fierce, tender pride that made her eyes shine. "I knew," she said softly when Alyssa finally paused for breath. "I've always known what was in you, even when no one else could see it. But Mom, the scholarship program, it's for students who've had years of training, who've performed in competitions. I've never even played for an audience before today." Monica took her daughter's hands, the hands that had revealed such unexpected beauty to a room of skeptics. "And yet, you made them listen." Mrs. Collins said the program includes weekly lessons with a master teacher. Alyssa continued, the reality of the opportunity beginning to sink in. And access to practice rooms with professional instruments and performance workshops. "And you deserve every bit of it," Monica said firmly. Alyssa's excitement faltered. "But what if I'm not good enough? What if today was just luck?" Monica shook her head. "What happened today wasn't luck, sweetheart. It was the result of every hour you spent at that church piano, every note you practiced when no one was listening, every time you got back up when the world tried to push you down." She squeezed Alyssa's hands. "Your talent isn't something that comes and goes. It's part of who you are." Alyssa leaned into her mother's embrace, allowing herself to believe, truly believe, that perhaps the door that had opened today wouldn't slam shut tomorrow. "There's something else," she said quietly. "After class, Madison told me this isn't over." She looked. I've never seen her that angry. Monica pulled back slightly. "Listen to me. People like Madison Harrington aren't used to the world not bending to their will. When someone challenges their place, especially someone they've underestimated, it threatens everything they believe about themselves. I wasn't trying to threaten her, Alyssa protested. I just played the piano. Sometimes being authentically yourself is the most threatening thing you can do in a world built on pretense, Monica said. But that doesn't mean you should make yourself smaller. Not ever again. That night, after her mother had gone to bed, Alyssa sat at their small kitchen table, Mrs. Collins's business card propped against a water glass before her. The scholarship application form glowed on the screen of her laptop. A comprehensive document requesting performance history, competition placements, and teacher recommendations. Her cursor hovered over the first empty field. What does she possibly write? That she practiced on a donated church piano? That her only teacher had been her own determination? That until today, the most appreciative audience she'd ever had was a stray cat that sometimes wandered into the church? She nearly closed the laptop, the familiar weight of impossibility settling over her. Then her gaze fell on a photograph magnetized to the refrigerator. Herself at 7 years old, sitting at the St. Mary's piano for the first time, her small face alight with discovery. Monica had captured the moment, just as Alyssa had found a simple melody, her expression one of pure wonder. That little girl hadn't known she was supposed to be intimidated by music. She hadn't been told yet that certain dreams weren't meant for people like her. She had simply recognized something that spoke to her soul and reached for it with open hands. Alyssa turned back to the application and began to type. In the performance experience section, she wrote honestly about her years playing at St. Mary's, about learning by ear and from borrowed books, about practicing finger positions on a paper keyboard when no real piano was available. In the musical philosophy essay, she described how music had been her voice when the world refused to hear her, how it had taught her that beauty could exist alongside struggle, how it had given her a language that transcended the limitations others tried to place on her. By the time she reached the final question, why do you believe you deserve this opportunity? Dawn was breaking outside the small apartment window. Exhausted but clear-headed, Alyssa wrote, I don't come from a background of privilege or formal training. I haven't performed in prestigious venues or won competitions. What I bring instead is a hunger that can only come from having to fight for every musical moment, an appreciation that can only develop when nothing is taken for granted, and a perspective that comes from learning to hear beauty in unexpected places. I deserve this opportunity not because of advantages I've had, but because of obstacles I've overcome. Not because someone told me I was special, but because I refused to believe I wasn't. Music has never been a hobby or an extracurricular activity for me. It has been my sanctuary, my voice, and my proof that some gifts transcend circumstance. If given this chance, I will bring to your program not just talent, but the kind of determination that can only be forged when passion meets resistance and refuses to yield. She read over her words once more, then clicked submit before doubt could overtake courage. The confirmation page appeared, official and impersonal. Your application has been received. Candidates will be notified within 2 weeks. 2 weeks. 14 days of uncertainty, of hoping, of bracing for disappointment while daring to dream. Alyssa closed the laptop and moved to the window. The city was waking up, delivery trucks rumbling past, early commuters hurrying to bus stops, the first rays of sun catching on windows across the street. It looked like any other morning, and yet nothing was the same. Whatever happened with the scholarship, she had crossed a threshold. She had stepped out of the shadows and into her own light. She had stopped apologizing for her existence and started claiming her space. For the first time since arriving at Willow Ridge Academy, Alyssa Carter wasn't afraid of what the day might bring.